Welcome, everyone, to episode number 9 of the Lifestyle Empowerment Podcast. On today's episode, let's talk about cravings. A lot of people have expressed that they struggle with cravings. Now, let's look at what causes cravings and what are some of the ways we can manage these cravings. And I'll break this down into tiers, we'll say, of symptom into root cause. Providing some education so one can, figure out where this is coming from and ultimately manage it. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to have cravings. I think that's just a part of human nature. But with that being said, I think it boils down to the definition of craving. So if you're sitting on a couch and you're watching TV and you see a cheeseburger pop up and you're I kind of would really like that cheeseburger. I'm craving that cheeseburger. That to me, I think is just kind of normal, most people would want a juicy cheeseburger. But if you're the kind of individual who is sitting on that couch and you've had a stressful day and a cheeseburger pops up and you're ready to kill somebody to have a cheeseburger, I think that's something that really needs to be addressed. And so I kind of want to talk about that situation and how we can, improve upon that. So if we're starting with one of the basic symptom of what would cause cravings, it would be poor blood sugar regulation. So what I mean by that is your blood glucose level is going high and low throughout the day. And what can cause this is things like insulin resistance, for example. So you will use more insulin, which will cause you to overcompensate, dropping your blood sugars too low. Then you will overcompensate with cortisol, bringing them too high again. And it's just this seesaw that occurs all day long. This is why for quite a bit of people, actually, a large carbohydrate breakfast is not the best choice because, a lot of us are experiencing less than optimal sleep quality. So we wake up in the morning, kind of tired and groggy, haven't done a great job of decreasing inflammation throughout our sleep. And then we eat these carbohydrates and we get a big blood sugar response in the morning. And then next thing you know, it drops real hard, and then you get those mid-afternoon crashes and you crave, more carbs or caffeine or whichever. Now, they'll say you are most insulin sensitive in the morning. That's very dependent. But also, if you look at Western society, what's the traditional breakfast? It's cereal, toast, just a very high carbohydrate breakfast. And this could create those blood sugar swings, creating these cravings. And that's just the one mechanism of it. But also you look at things like chronic inflammation, because inflammation is going to promote that insulin resistance. And then that's what causes cravings. The biggest broad diagnosis of what causes a craving though is stress. Now, when I say stress, people automatically your brain is going to think that, okay, he's talking about work stress, relationship stress, that kind of stuff. I classify stress as a whole. So yes, work stress, yes, relationship stress, yes, the stress that you place upon yourself while you're exercising in the gym, the stress you place upon yourself, breathing, toxic fumes in perfume shops, for example, places with carpets, stress from processed foods in the body, trying to, rid of the toxins that they come with, endocrine disruptors, you name it, right? It's everything as a whole in someone's day is stress to me. And so I look at addressing stress in all avenues to making sure that your body is, in an optimal state so you don't experience things like cravings. So this is why when we talk about cravings, there's not a lot of solutions for them. And then it just becomes the norm. And you always hear oh, I've had cravings my whole life, right? A good example is a lot of women have experienced a candida overgrowth. And so now we're kind of jumping down into more towards the root cause now. And so candida is an overgrowth of a bacteria within the gut. And it could be within other places, but we'll talk in context within the gut. What candida can do is candida can actually alter your brain chemistry to want sugar, because that's what's going to feed that candida. Because bacteria, the candida, is a living organism. It is designed to survive. So it's going to do whatever it takes to survive. So it can alter your brain chemistry and create these massive cravings, right? So you have that, but you also have the toxic exposure from the overgrowth creating inflammation, disrupting blood sugar regulation, resulting in cravings there as well, right? So when we look at it from like, let's say a body perspective, let's take the mind out of the equation for now. We're looking at the inflammation, the insulin resistance, we're looking at potential overgrowth. One big one that, to my knowledge, most women are very familiar with is cravings around their cycle. And that is due to the symptom would be the higher levels of estrogen, but what's happening around there, right? So first of all, the high levels of estrogen can really impact the thyroid. So then with an impacted thyroid, it's going to be less output of the thyroid, resulting in more cortisol, which means higher blood sugars and more stress, creating cravings. Also, you need to detoxify that estrogen. And a lot of people struggle to do that. That in itself is going to create more inflammation, which then is going to create more insulin resistance, which is then going to create more blood sugar swings. So those are just the symptoms, right? So when you're talking about females around their cycle with cravings, you want to look at making sure that they're detoxifying estrogen properly and that they're managing their stress. And I'm sure any woman would want to rip my head off for saying that. Like, I have no idea what it's like to be around that, but it's just, that's just the aspect of it, is regulating those blood sugars via the stress and estrogen clearance around a cycle, for example, supporting thyroid and things like that. But why is that occurring in the first place? Is there an overgrowth, right? Is there, an autoimmune disease? Is there something like polycystic ovarian syndrome or endometriosis that is creating these complications, right? Resulting, going down the chain and creating cravings. So figuring that out is the long-term solution to managing cravings. And so now that was in the aspect of the body. Now let's talk in the aspect of the mind, of the brain, of your psychology. You have what's known as your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala. And how I was taught and understand and utilize, these sections of the brain is your amygdala is your primitive state. It is your need. And what I mean by that is when you see a bowl of ice cream and you are thinking with your amygdala, so your amygdala is enlarged, you're like, I need that ice cream. I need that ice cream to survive. I will not survive without that ice cream. That is your amygdala. And when you are thinking more with your prefrontal cortex, that is what I classify as your want. So you see that ice cream, you're like, I want that ice cream, but I know I don't need that ice cream. And so how do we use more of the prefrontal cortex? That's just health and stress management, because high levels of cortisol are going to cause the amygdala to enlarge. And as mentioned, it's more primitive state. This is why stress makes you dumb, right? Because it's your more primitive state. And that's why you also can give into cravings. This is when you look at children. The majority of children will eat anything and everything in sight because it takes a while to develop a prefrontal cortex. And your amygdala is designed to get the most calorically dense foods for the least amount of work, right? So a lot of children, they will just eat a lot, right? Especially, in today's society with all the environmental aspects creating this. So focusing on the psychology part of it, this goes much deeper now too, because you look at what's going to really cause that psychology aspect of it. Yes, the stress on your physiology. So like I said, training, relationships, food you eat, the air you breathe, the water you drink. Yes, that will affect your amygdala. But when it comes to psychology, one of the biggest creators of stress is unresolved issues. This is why you read a lot about childhood trauma and all these kind of things creating addictive tendencies or creating obesity or eating disorders or whichever, right? Because that underlying stress has such an impact on your brain, which then goes into the physiology. And so that's definitely a very, complex topic, and I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, so that's out of my scope of practice. But that is something that if you are dealing with something like an underlying stress, or unresolved trauma, sorry, like, you need to speak to somebody about something, maybe they're making you feel a certain way, or you have that childhood trauma or something happened in your past that you've never spoken about, that stuff can really wear and tear on an individual. And so that's something that you may want to really consider if you're someone who struggles with something like cravings. Because that is one where, like, you could take all the supplements in the world and you could follow the most detailed, what we may believe is perfect for you nutrition protocol. If you're not dealing with those unresolved issues, you're still going to have a hard time, right? So, but going back to the physiology of it, I think if we're being real here, one of the biggest cause of cravings, I think, is gut health. Because when you look at normal commensal flora you look at like Akkermansia, okay, that is one that is really responsible for metabolic regulation. So if your body is not able to switch from using glucose to fat in a, we'll say a fashionable manner, then you're going to be heavily reliant on glucose and you're going to create a lot of blood sugar swings, and that's going to create a lot of cravings. But if your body has the ability to use fat as a fuel source very effectively, then you're going to have better stabilization of blood glucose levels and you're going to have less cravings. This is why liver health, like an adrenal and thyroid, are so important for that, because they're going to really impact your body's ability to use fat as a fuel source. So if you have a lot of difficulty, because of you're suffering from inflammation or poor liver health, you're going to have to use more stressful hormones in order to provide energy, which is going to result in more dysregulation of your blood glucose levels. So it's important that, your gut is in an optimal state. Then you talk about overgrowth. As mentioned, the overgrowth will create inflammation. Bacteria releases a lot of lipopolysaccharides, and that will result in a lot of inflammation. It's very, very toxic to the body. So this is where gut health is usually the culprit. And then whenever, someone expresses to me that they have these cravings, you run a GI map and you will see, hands down, you will see, whether that be candida or whether that be some autoimmune overgrowth of bacteria, or whether just overgrowth of opportunistic bacteria or SIBO or something along the lines of that. For those that have been following me, GI map is something that I'm really heavily trying to, shall I say, push people into, because when you're sitting here and you're banging your head against the wall trying to figure out why the heck is this not working for this individual, you do a GI map and you solve it. So, but yeah, you will see individuals who suffer with craving, who suffer with emotional eating, binge eating, things along that nature. You will see an overgrowth of bacteria, or also, or low normal commensal flora, because your healthy flora is also going to be responsible for getting the most out of your food and your metabolism and whatnot. So, and decreasing inflammation and fighting pathogens and mucosa integrity and all that kind of stuff, right? So, like, as a very broad diagnosis of cravings is going to be stress. That's the most broad you can put it, right? But where is that stress coming from? Because, like, are you in a toxic relationship? And I don't mean just with with a lover. It could be a client, it could be a friend, it could be a landlord, it could be anything, right? Are you in a toxic relationship and that's going to eat away at you? Are you in a very poor environment? So for example, if you and your loved one have fought multiple times in a home, right? You're going to be, that's that unresolved trauma. Like, this is the place where we fight. That's going to create a lot of stress. That's going to create a lot of cravings, right? Are you eating poor food, right? That's going to create a lot of stress, inflammation, toxin, right? Are you dealing with an overgrowth? A lot of stress, a lot of toxins, right? So it's figuring out where that stress, are you excessively training? That's what a lot of people don't understand, is like cravings can come from your training, because your training not only can require a lot of fuel, but excessive training can create a lot of inflammation, full circle, dysregulated blood glucose levels, cravings, enlarged amygdala, cravings, right? So that is the difficult part, is figuring out, okay, like what stressor is creating these cravings. And you can begin to pick away at that kind of stuff and nail it down. Essentially why I'm saying that is because I get frustrated when people tell me that, that cravings are normal, right? Yeah, they're normal under the context of that we are significantly stressed in today's society. They are normal, but they shouldn't have to be something that you have to fight through constantly, right? Because anyone who follows a nutrition plan knows that when they give into those cravings and they end up binge eating, they feel significantly guilty afterwards, which creates more stress, which creates more dysregulation, which just leads to more cravings. This is why a lot of people, influencers, gurus, and everything are trying to promote, look, just eat that piece of cake and you're going to be fine, right? Because the stress that you put yourself under for eating that piece of cake is literally just going to create more stress, more dysregulation, and result in cravings again. That's a huge issue for me. A huge issue for me. Like I'll eat a whole pizza and then I'll feel really guilty and then I'll do it again the next day. Right? Because like for me, the stress comes from like I have an overgrowth, right? Dealing with that. But it's more of the fact that I think I need to eat more to be big. But what's happening is by me eating more, I'm creating more inflammation and I'm not putting on size, right? So then it's this full circle of stress. And so it's managing that stress. So it's almost coming to terms that, look, it's okay to have some pizza. It's okay to have a burger, right? It's okay to do these things. Now, what's not okay is to consistently do that for some individuals. Some people can get away with it, right? But, if you're a certain health status, you might not want to do that. But it's managing that stress and coming to terms with that. And then realize that, okay, this is not supposed to be normal. There is something going on within my physiology or within my psychology that are promoting these cravings. It's not just what the human body should do in an optimal state. And so discovering why that's occurring is how you can begin to pick away at those cravings. Sometimes that even just knowing. So for example, I had a call the other day with a client. She received her GI map back and she mentioned, she's like, now that I see and have begun to understand what's going on in my stomach, it's easier to deal with this stuff, right? Like, so for example, if you have whatever sort of mechanism, a hormonal disorder, autoimmune disease, bacterial overgrowth contributing to cravings, every time you get a craving, you'll be like, oh yeah, it's just my gut bacteria, or it's just this, it's just that. I know it will get better because we're working towards that. So sometimes having that knowledge also helps you manage your cravings because you just know that, okay, right now this is a part of the process, but it's not going to be like this forever. Now that I know that this is what's occurring, that this is what's creating them, I'm going to address them, and these cravings are no longer going to be here, or they're going to be much more manageable. So I can get through this at this point in time until I reach that point where these cravings are manageable. So that really helps a lot too, having the know. And also accepting things too, as mentioned, unresolved traumas, just be like, hey, look, like I have to have a conversation with this individual because this is unresolved and it's creating stress in my life. And knowing that's how you make the next step, right? So that is the, we'll say, long-term solution for dealing with cravings. It's finding that root cause, addressing that root cause, and understanding how it affects each aspect and ultimately ends up in the enlargement of the amygdala and the blood sugar regulation is what's going to stimulate those cravings. So now short term, one would be not binge eating, but enjoying yourself, but indulging, right? Because what happens is when we get these extreme cravings, as mentioned, instead of having a slice or two of pizza, you have 4 or 5 a whole pizza, which then full circle creates the excessive stress. So having 1 or 2 might not be as bad. It might not create this massive blood sugar swing, and then you have more of a regulation of your blood sugar, not resulting in cravings later in the day or the next day or something along the lines of that, right? So just, like I said, coming to terms and just having a piece of pizza, having a bowl of ice cream, whichever, right? Just don't overdo it. Don't eat the entire container like I do. So there's that. There's a really lame way, is lime juice and glutamine. Glutamine can help regulate blood sugar levels. Now be cautious, once again, seek professional advice because glutamine can react to people with inflamed GI tracts. But if you're able to handle glutamine, you could take a bolus dose of glutamine, anywhere from 10, 20, maybe even 30 grams. with some lime juice or whatever, and that actually helps a lot. The craving kind of goes away, but it's just stimulating that proper blood sugar release, controls the levels better. I know that's not exciting, but that's a really good way to do it. If it's due to high blood glucose levels, going for a walk, right? Going for a walk, distracting yourself, sometimes hanging out with friends is not the best idea because they can be bad influences, but they can manage your stress doing that. So there's those mechanisms as well that you could use. But also things like if you're going to give into those cravings, you could use glucose disposal agents. Once again, always seek professional advice. But things like berberine, even cinnamon, R-alpha lipoic acid, chromium picolinate, like there's all those kind of things. You could just look up GDA, glucose disposal agents, GDA supplements. And there's ways of doing that too to help stabilize your blood sugars better, possibly decrease inflammation, not promote more cravings down the road. Utilize that food better that you may be giving into. Meditation, because mentioned, stress. So meditation, nature, anything to improve your vagal tone, humming, singing, gargling, vibration stuff, some weird hippie stuff as we like to call it, just all that kind of stuff to help manage cravings, which is much easier said than done because when you're in that state, remember that state is being caused due to cravings, or due to stress, And so the last thing we kind of want to do when we're in an angered or emotional state is sit down and hum a kumbaya and try to calm ourselves down. It's just much easier to reach for that candy bar or whichever. Like for me personally, anger is where I really binge eat, not sadness. It's anger for me. So, somebody really upsets me, like angers me, not like sad upsets, like angers me. I tend to reach for less than optimal food choices. Or for me, a big one, comes down to the psychology and managing and coming to terms. If I miss a meal, so if like I'm supposed to be eating at 1:00 because of my meal timing and I don't get to it till 2:00, I get all pissed off and I just eat whatever. I'll go get a burger. I'll go do this. I'll go do that. I'll make some sort of excuse, right? I'll justify it when I'm in an angry state. And that's when I give in. And for me, like, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a craving because I don't really crave. I don't sit here and go, oh, I crave pizza or whatever. I eat out of anger, but the response is still classified as craving, like what's happening within the body, right? So it's all about managing stress and finding that root cause to is what's creating that stress. And ultimately that's how you're going to get better control of your cravings. And in the short-term aspect of things, like it's lame, but bolus doses of glutamine with lime juice is a really great way to do it. Some people can even get through it by just chugging a bunch of water, filling their stomach. Sometimes that works, right? It all depends on the individual. So there's those aspects. But as mentioned too, like go ahead and have, a slice or two of pizza or a cheeseburger or whichever. Just don't overindulge and go for a walk afterwards. Right? Because once again, it's going to really help stabilize blood glucose levels and not create swings, because those swings don't just go away overnight. They can go into the next day and the day after and the day after. And this is why people could struggle like every single day dealing with cravings, not to mention significantly other amount of issues, but we're on the topic of cravings today. So yeah, those are some of the ways that I, can help people manage cravings. And also, as soon as someone tells you they have a craving, I go directly to trying to assess gut health. And in most cases, there is some form of overgrowth, the emotional eating from the overgrowth. You look at the gut health, majority of your neurotransmitters are produced in the gut. You are not creating a lot of them. You look at depression, you're not creating a lot of serotonin due to poor gut health. Either that's inflammation, low normal commensal flora, or an overgrowth of some, we'll call it bad bacteria, or even a parasite, right? So you get these cravings. We also look at this food it's that dopamine. The dopamine's high. We eat the food, we get that serotonin release or whatever. We feel good. We associate that. So, we're not producing serotonin. So we just continuously associate, high palatable foods like pizza and ice cream with happiness, right? So we need to create a different environment and achieve happiness through other avenues. which then you try to have that conversation with people and that doesn't go well. That's where it comes down to the gut health, because you're going to be a lot happier in a certain environment with optimal gut health. Now, that environment could be the one that's contributing to the poor gut health, but if that makes sense, like, so for example, if flying a kite doesn't make you happy when you have poor gut health, it might make you happy when you have good gut health. It's really vague, but that's kind of what I'm getting at. So we work on that gut health so you are happier in situations that, you know, normally wouldn't bring a lot of happiness. You find joy in more things. And that's something I experienced in myself. There's a lot of things that used to upset me, and I was a very negative person, and things that I just would not enjoy. And then all of a sudden I've come to found that it's like, I enjoy that all of a sudden, but that's because I've really been working on my gut health and producing more neurotransmitters and decreasing inflammation and yada, 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 right? So, you know, focusing on that is ultimately how you're going to improve your ability to manage cravings, but also don't stress out that you have cravings, right? Once again, there is going to be a reason. It's not just some, you know, crazy phenomenon that there's no explanation. There's always an explanation as to why someone has cravings. So, you know, possibly manage that any way you can acutely, but focus on the long-term action of fixing whatever's going on within the body, within the mind, to help manage those cravings long-term. Okay? So I hope you all enjoyed that. Take care, everybody.